Fantastic. All right, let's take it away. We're looking forward to seeing this. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. And I guess a couple questions for you first. We didn't really talk about how long you wanted to go, about 45 minutes or so?
You can go as long as you like. We have really no time constraints.
Till people start dropping out. Okay, great.
No, even if they drop out, we will continue to record. Don't worry about it. Just keep going.
Okay. And the other question, if anyone who is online is a biologist and wants to chime in, or even if you're not a biologist, and you want to chime in, by all means, feel free as I'm going along. So you can see the title by now, you've read it. I want to talk about what I call complex simplicity of a rocky landscape, because the sea turns out to be, at least the geology around the Sea of Cortez turns out to be both really complicated and really simple at the same time. Then we'll talk a bit about plants, and then we'll talk about animals. That's simple. So starting out here, we'll start out talking about the geology at a very big scale. And this, believe it or not, is where it's simple. Even though this diagram makes it look complicated, it's really not. So I'm going to walk through it. So go back 200 million years to 65 million years ago. So that's time of the dinosaurs. Pangea, the supercontinent, is broken up. So there's continental plates floating around, oceanic plates floating around. And two oceanic plates are colliding with the North American plate. Sea of Cortez does not yet exist at all. So flash forward to the Eocene, say 45 million years ago, the Pacific plate and oceanic plate makes contact. So then you start to get some volcanic activity, you start to get some uplifting. Go down to Eocene about 35 million years ago, you've got more uplifting as not only the Pacific plate, but now not only the Farallon plate, but also the Pacific plate are both under the edge of North America. And then something bizarre starts to happen. So the Farallon plate and the Pacific plate both moved in, they went underneath the North American plate, and then they start to spread apart again. But at this point, the Pacific plate has grabbed onto a piece of the continent above it, a piece of the continental North American plate, and it's starting to move away. And in the lower part, where it says end of Miocene, about 5.5 million years ago, you can see that there's a rift starting to form. You can actually see the beginnings of that rift earlier, but that rift has started to form, and about 5.5 million years ago, the Sea of Cortez fills with water. So it started out as a rift valley. It may have had some water from rivers. It may have had some marine incursion from the west through the mountains that we see today. But the real Sea of Cortez didn't form until about 5.5 million years ago, which by ocean standards makes it a reasonably youthful ocean, a reasonably young sea. And what do you get when you have a young sea? Well, one thing you get is volcanoes, and there's lots of evidence of volcanism around the Sea of Cortez or the Gulf of California. Some of it's hot springs. You can find hot springs in lots of locations along the coast, which is especially great in the wintertime. But you can also see volcanoes. You can see older volcanoes like this one that are deeply eroded. There's some younger volcanoes in the Gulf of California, including Isla Tortuga, and then another one of the islands up north on the Baja coast, north of BLA. There's a very young volcano. So lots of volcanic activity, so lots of scenes like this. You might even, at times, you might even find yourself anchoring inside of what you might think is an old volcanic crater or caldera, and it may well be that one wall of that caldera has eroded or was lost in an explosion. The base of the caldera was filled with water, and now you're anchored in it. So that's a real thing in the Sea of Cortez. So ignore the whale, because we're still talking about geology here. But the other thing that happens when continental plates collide is you get uplift, and when they spread apart, you get sort of a stretching out of the coast, and you start forming these huge blocks of land, and that might be what we're looking at in the back behind the whale is the sloped side of a block of land that formed because of this spreading out, this accordion-like effect of continental plate collision with oceanic plate collision, oceanic plates. So those plates collide, and then they spread apart. And if you can imagine what happens when you sort of kick the edge of a carpet, it wrinkles, and then you back off and spread that carpet back out, and those wrinkles start to come out. Well, with rock, it forms blocks, and some of those blocks fall down into the sea. They're often angled at an angled slope like this. That could also be from an eroded coast. I showed this slide to Marcus Johnson, who's a well-known geologist who works in the Sea of Cortez and has been working in the sea for decades. And he looked at it and said, well, that could be that could be a formation from that, or it could be something else. He couldn't tell from the photo, but I'm fairly sure that that is in fact a horst formation. So they're called horst and grabens. Grabens are when they sink down. Horsts are when they're pushed up, and you see these angled slopes. One side will be angled, and the other side will be quite steep, and that's evidence of this kind of folding of the earth from tectonic plates moving around. So you have all this old stuff going on with volcanoes and with horst and graben formation, but you also have lots of erosion, you know. So if you sail in the Sea of Cortez, unless you're there in the summer, you're going to swear that it never rains. And it's the least rainy place we've ever sailed in. Sometimes annoyingly so, because when it does rain, all the dirt that's accumulated in the upper rigging sprinkles down on the deck. So you get a few drops of rain and lots of drops of mud coming out of your rigging. But in fact, it does rain in the sea torrentially during storm season in certain places, and especially when there's hurricanes. And you can see evidence of that in some of the arroyos that are full of freshwater pools like this one. But you can also see other evidence of erosion in this photo with those huge boulders in the back. And some people that aren't used to this kind of thing are going to say there's no way that water can move boulders like that. I assure you, water does move boulders as big as that and bigger. And it's a very common thing in geology to see that. In the Mississippi River, as an example, boulders the size of VW microbuses are often moved around, much to the dismay of the Corps of Engineers who place those boulders there for revetment, for shoreline protection. So don't ignore the reality of erosion when you're looking around at the rocks out there. This is another thing that Marcus Johnson works on a lot, is this idea of the role of erosion in these landscapes, which he, I think, believes is much more extensive than many other biologists believe. So when you have erosion, you also have deposition, you have sediment accumulation, and you see that here. So this is actually limestone. So limestone's a little bit, well, limestone's very different than sandstone, but you'll see sandstone and limestone throughout the shorelines of the Gulf and underwater as well. Limestone forms in the marine environment, and you see it on the surface like this because either the sea level has gone down or the land itself has been uplifted. And of course, both things are happening around the Sea of Cortez. So you'll see limestone formations, and remember, they formed in the ocean, but you'll see them up the sides of mountains quite high. The reason I'm using this slide, which has limestone in it, is that this is not only limestone. If you look underneath the sort of tan limestone where the person is standing, underneath that, you'll see some grayer rock. And in this slide, you'll see it even more clearly. It's the same feature with limestone on top, limestone on the bottom, and this gray rock in the middle. And that gray rock is volcanic ash, or sometimes called tuff, Tuff. And volcanic ash forms when a volcano explodes and it sends molten sand-sized particles into the air, and those sand-sized particles settle back down. So in this case, the ash settled on top of an existing bed of limestone and then was buried by another bed of limestone. And then that entire feature either was raised up above sea level or sea level dropped and went below that feature. So the things you're going to see for rocks around the sea are volcanic rocks, mostly andesite and rhyolite. You'll see some granite, which forms not from volcanic flows, but deep underground, under lots of pressure and time. You'll see sandstone, you'll see limestone, and you'll see ash, and also ash with volcanic bombs mixed in with the ash. And a volcanic bomb is just a boulder that's spewed out by a volcano. It's kind of molten hot, not liquid, but molten and soft, and it lands in the ash and is embedded in the ash. So instead of just this fine granular sand that's volcanic ash, you'll see boulders as well, and those are volcanic bombs. And I wanted to touch base a little bit more on limestone. In different places around the Sea of Cortez, you'll see massive, massive deposits of limestone like this one. And this one, if you look closely, you'll see, especially if you're on the ground and you look closely, you'll see that was a coral reef. And you can see the coral pillars standing up, the branches of coral. You can pick out some different kinds of shells. There's probably sea urchins in there. All the different things that you would expect to see on a coral reef that have calcium carbonate skeletons are in this limestone feature. So again, really simple how the sea formed. through this tectonic movement, this tectonic plate movement. Very simple sort of history of a youthful sea. But in the 5.5 million years or so that have happened, that have passed since the sea formed, lots and lots of other stuff has been going on. And don't forget that the stuff around the basin can be much older than the sea itself. So the stuff around the basin could be 10 million years old, 20 million years old, 30 million years old. And a lot of the granite that you see is in fact quite old. It's only exposed on the surface because the surface that surrounded it when it was formed has eroded away. So complex simplicity, and I just threw that photo out there to kind of give you this vision that you can look out at shore on the Sea of Cortez in most places, and you can keep yourself entertained for days, weeks, a lifetime, trying to figure out what went on geologically. And people like Marcus Johnson and his students, that's exactly what they do. They've written lots of papers about it. If you're into rocks or if you're into understanding nature, it's quite fascinating. If you're not, just avoid saying things like, oh, there's nothing out here but a few rocks. It is actually really diverse and it's very, very interesting. I don't have a slide for this, but I should also add that a lot of this starts to fade away in the upper sea as you move up toward Puerto Penasco. And why is that? It's because it's all sand up there, mostly sand. It's not all sand. It's mostly sand that's come down the Colorado River Delta over thousands and thousands and thousands of years and filled up the basin of the Sea of Cortez and formed beaches and extensive sand dunes inshore. But as you move south, you're back into the exposed rock. So with all that rock, people might say to themselves, well, lots of rock, there must not be very much growing there. And I've even heard sailors say that. There's not a lot here to look at in terms of plants. It's not very interesting. It's just all barren landscape. I've heard people say that, and I scratch my head and wonder when I hear that, because in fact, it's quite diverse. I have some notes here to remind me. From memory, there are, let's see, I won't trust my memory for this. There are, I could have trusted my memory. There are 4,000 native species of plants on the Baja Peninsula alone. So that doesn't count the native plant species that don't occur on the Baja, but do occur on the mainland. So 4,000 species, about 700 of those are endemic species. So species that occur nowhere else in the world naturally, that occur nowhere else naturally other than Baja. And I just have some snapshots here of a few plants. That's coach whip on the left and kind of moving around clockwise. That's either Palo Verde or, well, it's probably Palo Verde. Then there's a plant that I think is called graythorn, a little cactus that I'll talk more about, a red mangrove, and it's either a desert cotton or probably a Parkinson, I think it's Parkinsonian's cotton plant, so a wild cotton that grows in the Baja. So those are just a handful of the 7,000 plants or 4,000 plant species. And you're not going to learn them all. Nobody's going to learn all the plants in the Sea of Cortez. But I do want to lean in on just two groups. One group is the cactus, and the other group that I'll come to in a minute is the mangroves. So of course you'll see cactus everywhere you'll go. You'll pick cactus thorns out of your shoes. You might, if you have a dog, you might pick cactus thorns out of your dog's paws and his mouth. 120 species of cactus described more or less in the Sea of Cortez. And I say more or less because there are arguments about whether or not some of those are real species or subspecies. So, the number changes here and there. There's probably some species that have not been described. Here starting on the left side, there's a cholla cactus or drawing a blank on the name of that cactus. It's a common cactus. And there's a mammillaria cactus on the right and a galloping cactus on the bottom. But you can't learn even all the cactus in the Sea of Cortez, and don't even try. But do try to remember this one. This is the elephant cactus, or the cardon cactus, as it's sometimes called. This is its beautiful flower. This is, I believe, the largest cactus found anywhere in the world. It's similar to the saguaro cactus that they have in California and I think parts of Arizona, but it is a different species. It has a different growth form. You can see it branches out. If you're familiar with saguaro cactuses, the elephant cactus or cardon branches out lower down. It's really an amazing cactus, and it can grow to, I want to say the record tallest individual was about 60 feet tall. So these are tree-sized cactus. And in some places, you'll see cactus forests, especially on some of the islands in the midrifts and even a little bit south of the midrifts. You'll see cactus forests that look like, as you approach them, they look like forests, and they are forests. And of course, this cactus is habitat for lots of critters. So, well, woodpeckers, for example, like the ladderback woodpecker and the Gila woodpecker, nest in these cactus. Turkey vultures roost on top of these cactus. Bats pollinate this cactus, so it's mostly a bat and moth pollinated cactus that blooms at night. And as they say, the blossoms only last one night. I'm not sure I believe that, because I feel like I've seen some blossoms that have lasted more than one night, but it is what they say. And of course, this cactus, like a lot of cactus, has lots of edible parts. So if you don't remember any other plant, remember this one. You're going to see a lot of it in the Sea of Cortez, and especially on the Baja. You'll also see mangrove, and I know that mangrove, for people coming up from the Caribbean, and I think many of your members are sailing up from the Caribbean like we did through the Panama Canal and up. Anyone coming from that side is going to be very, very accustomed to seeing mangrove forests, big, extensive mangrove forests in Florida, in many of the Caribbean islands. Even parts of Texas and Louisiana have scattered mangroves, so lots of mangrove in that part of the world. On this coast, especially as you move into Mexico, much less so. In the Gulf of California or the Sea of Cortez, even less so. But there are pockets of mangrove, and there's some people say there's 5 species of mangrove, but that includes 2 that are sort of fake mangroves. Well, I won't even tell you what they are, but there's really 3 kinds of true mangrove. And when I say true mangrove, I mean mangrove that grow in full seawater, or even water that's saltier than seawater. And the first is the red mangrove. And there are different kinds of red mangrove, but only one species that occurs in the Gulf of California. And the red mangrove has these prop roots, and you can see both in the larger picture and in the smaller inset picture, these roots that are like fingers stretching out into the ocean. And they're great habitat. Fish hide inside of these things. Mussels grow on them, clams grow on them, barnacles grow on them, oysters grow on them. Lots of invertebrates mixed in with the mangrove. This is a racer crab that lives in mangrove habitat. And of course, lots and lots of birds. And this is the mangrove warbler, which is very similar to another warbler that you'll see farther north, but the species only occurs in the region around the Sea of Cortez and perhaps further south, but not further north. And red mangrove puts out these, people say, oh, those are interesting fruit, or they'll say those are interesting seeds. They're neither one, really. Those are mangrove propagules, as they're called. They're seeds that have germinated and started to grow while they're still attached to the mother plant. So eventually those will fall off and they'll float around in the ocean or in the bay until they hit bottom, and then they'll try to take root. And if they're lucky, they'll have taken root in a place that's not going to be too deep or too shallow for them to turn into a tree and contribute to the mangrove forest. So that's the red mangrove. Black mangrove, and all mangroves look sort of similar at a glance, but black mangrove has a different kind of root structure. It has these so-called pneumatophores, roots that stick up like fingers from the ground. It also forms great habitat, not quite as diverse as red mangrove root habitat. And here you can see it at low tide, sticking up above the mud, trying to find oxygen to pump into that plant's systems. And the last one is white mangrove, and these are the leaves of a white mangrove. And what's special about that, and why did I take such a close-up? If you can always tell a white mangrove because it has these 2 little glands right at the base of the leaf, right at the petiole. There's these 2 little glands, and those are salt exclusion glands. And you won't, if it's a red mangrove or a black mangrove, you won't find salt exclusion glands. You only see those on the whites. On the blacks, you'll see salt layers built up, mostly on the bottom of the leaves, but also on the tops of the leaves. And on the red mangroves, they mainly try to exclude salts through their roots, with sort of a filter going on. So that's mangroves. The last thing I want to share with you in the plant world is this. This is, again, knowledge I gained from Marcus Johnson. These are stromatolites, and probably not everybody knows what a stromatolite is. They are the oldest known fossilized life form on Earth. So these came into existence, we believe, on the order of 3.5 billion years ago. So the Earth might have been 2.5. I think it was 3.5 million years ago. quite a long time ago. These are cyanobacteria or blue-green bacterial colonies that form these strange features on the surface. And it almost looks like just dried out and cracked clay, but it's not. These are stromatolites, and Marcus took them into a laboratory and analyzed them to confirm that indeed it was these blue-green algae. If you go online and you Google stromatolite, you're going to see entries that will say either that stromatolites are only known from Western Australia or they're only known from the Bahamas or both. You'll find very few sources that will talk about the stromatolites that exist in the Sea of Cortez. And I know of, I think, 3 places where I could find them. Marcus might know more, but I found them in 3 different locations. So watch for those in your journeys, and you can impress everybody by your knowledge that you're looking at a living fossil, and they are alive, but at the same time, they're laying down rock skeletons that'll last for, in the right conditions, for 3.5 billion years. Okay, well, that's enough for plants, and throw cyanobacteria in there with plants. And let's talk about wildlife. So wildlife is another one. You know, I hear people all the time telling me, other boaters always telling me, you know, the only wildlife we see here is coyotes, and what else do they see? Rabbits. So they see coyotes and rabbits, and of course they see lots and lots of birds, and we'll come to birds later. But really, the area around the Sea of Cortez is full of wildlife. I keep a wildlife camera on board. It's a trap camera, so it's a remotely triggered camera. I just strap it to a tree or a cactus, leave it overnight, and come back the next day and see what I've seen. In this case, it's a white-tailed deer. This one is I can't see the whole thing because it's blocked off. I think it's a coyote. This is a ringtail. That was on one of the smaller islands in the sea, and I was actually quite surprised to find a ringtail on one of these small islands that doesn't appear to have any surface fresh water. And then some kind of a desert rat, possibly a kangaroo rat. So if you're interested in this kind of thing, you can pick up a wildlife camera for, I don't know, $50 or $60, put it out once in a while and see what you get. There's a lot of wildlife out there. And my wife and I always say, if we take a real camera with us when we're hiking, we're never going to see anything. And that's almost always true. In this next slide, as proof of that, this is a bighorn sheep or a desert bighorn. And we didn't have a camera with us, and that's why we saw this desert bighorn. But we took that photo with a cell phone. So we kind of stalked this animal as though we were hunting it. And it was very aware of where both of us were, even though we kind of came at it from 2 angles and got close enough for this very grainy cell phone shot. I would say it's pretty unusual to see desert bighorn. They are protected, but I believe they're still hunted illegally. On at least one island, they're sort of stalked and nurtured and hunted legally as a trophy hunt, a very expensive trophy hunt. But keep your eye out for them. So this next picture, you're going to say, well, I thought birds were going to come later. And they are going to come later. So those aren't birds, those are bats. And that is the Mexican free-tailed bat. And they come out in the millions. It's one of the most abundant bats on Earth. This is in a cave near Topolobampo. It's actually not a natural cave. It's an abandoned mine, or it might have started life as a cave and later became a mine. The mine was abandoned, and then it was taken up as a roosting and brooding site for these Mexican long-tailed bats. And they emerge at night by the tens of thousands to probably millions. And on a good emergence, they'll look like smoke coming out of the ground. It's quite amazing. Here's a closer up view. There are, and again, I'll check my notes. There are how many bat species in Baja? 25 species of bat in the Baja alone. So this one is the most abundant when you can find it, when you're at one of its roosting sites. It's also in some ways the most interesting. This bat during World War II, the American military tried to weaponize this bat by basically gluing incendiary capsules to the bottoms of the bats. And the idea was to drop these bats out of an airplane over Japanese cities, and the bats would roost in these paper houses that the Japanese lived in and set entire cities on fire. But of course, Hiroshima and Nagasaki happened, and then they decided bats weren't really worth the trouble, and the Japanese were surrendered from the war. But there's 25 species of bats, at least. Some of them are fruit bats, like this one. This is a fruit bat sitting in a date palm tree. If you ever wake up on your boat and you have what look like these weird fruit droppings on your boat, especially if they're in a line under your rigging or under a boom. That means you've had some fruit bats nesting on your rigging, and they've laid down a line that you can know they were there. So fruit bats. Oh, there's also fishing bats, and unfortunately, I don't have a picture of fishing bats, but there are fishing bats in the Sea of Cortez, and I've seen them in the Caribbean as well, for that matter. But they are bats that hunt like a bird of prey would hunt. They take small fish out of the water and eat them. So keep your eye out for those. Lizards. So there are, let's see how many species of lizards. I wish I could say I could remember all this, but there's likely over 60 species of lizards on the islands and on the Baja Peninsula, and possibly even more on the mainland. This is a chuckwalla, a species of chuckwalla lizard. It's a big, ugly thing, and if you've never, big, ugly, or big and handsome, I guess you can take your pick. If you've never seen one, they're sort of striking because they are so fat and clumsy looking. They are quite approachable. They live in shallow burrows in the ground on some of the islands, up in the midriff area. They're not in the islands. Further south, they're only up in the midriff area. And the Seri Indian people apparently moved these guys around from island to island, establishing populations of chuckwallas because they're, at least as a Seri Indian in the past would say, they're good to eat. So on some of the islands, they're very, very common and fun to look at, and just kind of amazing fat lizards. And I'm going to say they might get up to about 18 inches long, I would say. So they're not tiny. This is a collared lizard. I'm not going to go through a whole bunch of lizards. This is the last one, but this is a collared lizard. I think they're very handsome lizards with their coloration. They're very fast. People are often tempted to pick them up. They do bite. The body's only about 4 inches long, but the tail probably makes these guys close to a foot long. And they do bite, so just remember that if you decide to pick one up. They are, unlike the chuckwalla, which is more or less a vegetarian, these guys are insect eaters, and they'll take other lizards and that kind of thing. So once in a while, you'll see a little puffball on a sand flat or on a rock. You'll see a little puffball. And if that puffball is blowing up wind, it's probably an insect. It's probably this insect, because puffballs don't blow up wind, but insects can walk up wind. And resist all temptation to pick this guy up. Its common name is cow killer. It's actually a species of wasp. And I've never been stung by one, but apparently they have a very, very ferocious sting. And it's the kind of thing that if you are tempted to pick one up, you'll probably only pick it up once. You probably won't do it twice. Bees. Everybody who sails in the Sea of Cortez at one time or another is concerned about bees or has encounters with bees. And of course, and these are honeybees. It's the honeybee that originated probably in Southeast Asia and was brought to the New World some hundreds of years ago. So it's not a native species, it's an exotic species. And in places around the Gulf of California, the Sea of Cortez, they are very, very, very thirsty. And they will come to your boat and they will look for fresh water. They'll send out a scout or two scouts. And if that scout or two scouts finds some fresh water and goes back and tells its buddies, you can expect company, and you can expect a lot of company sometimes. So if you leave your portholes open and there's a little bit of fresh water in your sink, or you just wash the dishes and you go out in your dinghy for a couple of hours and you come back, the inside of your boat may be full of honeybees. The picture here shows two buckets, and the reason I'm using that photo is I just thought this was kind of interesting. We had two buckets that both had a little bit of fresh water on them on deck. And on day one, some scouts found us and we had a few hundred bees that had drowned in the white bucket. None of them on the first day, none of them were in the orange bucket. On the second day, the white bucket had thousands of drowned bees and the orange bucket had a few. On the third day, we dumped the water. It was just too many dead bees accumulating, and it just wasn't fair to the bees, even though they want water, too many were drowning. So we dumped the water out, but you can see what it looked like on the third day. So for some reason, the white bucket, even though they both had the same water in them, the white bucket was way, way more attracted to the bees. I have no idea why. The good news is they tend not to sting. They do sting. They are honeybees. They do sting. It seems to be a strain of honeybee that's not particularly ferocious. So it's not there, and there are some fairly ferocious strains of honeybees, but not these guys. If you really want to avoid having them on your boat, there's some tricks you can do. The most obvious thing you can do is make a little raft and put some fresh water in that little raft and put it on a line and tow it out 30 or 40 feet behind your boat while you're at anchor. And the bees are going to hang around on that raft and not on your boat. If they can find easy water, they're going to take that easy water and not annoy you. The other way to get rid of them, of course, is just to pick up the anchor and sail away. They're not going to follow you for miles and miles. They probably won't even follow you for more than a mile. So honeybees. Tarantulas, they're out there. There's lots of them, but you hardly ever see them because tarantulas are mostly nocturnal. The rest of the time they spend in their burrows, unless they're looking for mates or on some kind of a migration or something like that. So tarantulas. Now switching to birds. So blue-footed boobies, one of the most striking birds in the Sea of Cortez, in my opinion. And one thing I love about blue-footed boobies is that I have a lot of friends, even biologist friends, who say, oh, they only occur in the Galapagos. And I can only imagine that that's because the people that promote the Galapagos tell people come here and see blue-footed boobies and somehow leave the impression that they only exist in the Galapagos. In fact, they're pretty common in the Gulf of California, in the Sea of Cortez. They're even nesting on various islands in the Sea of Cortez. And there's a major nesting colony just south of the sea on Isla Isabela that's been tracked for well over 3 decades. During the nesting season, there's students there from one of the universities in Mexico, and they're always delighted to talk to boaters. And the students I've talked to that are out there, they always say, I wish more boaters would come and talk to us so we can tell them about our work and share our work with us. And also, they're just kind of bored out there because they're out there for 60-day hitches working with nesting blue-footed boobies. So blue-footed boobies. Hummingbirds. This is a Xanthus's hummingbird. It's an endemic. It's one of 6 bird species that are endemic to the Baja Peninsula, a beautiful hummingbird. And I didn't mention how many bird species there are because I don't remember. There's 6 endemics. And in total, there's about 400 species of birds in the Baja and around the Sea of Cortez. Here's another one of my favorite birds. These are eared grebes. So it's a small grebe, and you've probably seen grebes before around different places in North America and whatnot. But these grebes, they're smaller than most grebes, and they form what I call rafts. And I think other biologists also call them rafts. They form huge flocks swimming. And here you can see a small piece of a raft of eared grebes swimming. But what's so cool about these birds is that they dive together. They dive as a flock. So one of them will go underwater, all the rest of them will follow underwater. And they all manage to stay together, and 99% of them surface together as well. Then they'll stay on the surface for a while, and then they'll go back underwater. And there's always a few stragglers that get lost underwater in the low visibility, and they'll surface somewhere else, and they'll eventually rejoin the group. So eared grebes. Osprey, and of course, I think probably nowadays everybody's seen osprey. I remember a time when osprey were quite scarce thanks to DDT, and they really recovered nicely after DDT was limited and actually banned in North America. But you'll see osprey quite commonly on most of the islands around the Sea of Cortez and on many areas on the mainland, and usually in nests. You can usually spot their gigantic nests, normally on top of pillars, although I did see an osprey nest on a beach, which was amazing to me. I've never heard of them nesting on beaches before. They're normally high up, but an osprey. Cormorant. So there's 3 species of cormorant in the Sea of Cortez. They're also a very common bird. This one is the double-crested cormorant. The other 2 species are less common, but you'll see these birds in great abundance, and it's a large cormorant. Yellow-footed gulls. So some people are going to look at this and say, well, that's a California gull. They do look an awful lot alike, but they are different bird species. The yellow-footed gull is quite common, especially in the northern half of the Gulf of California. What's special about this picture, you can see that there's some nestlings in the background. So yellow-footed gulls often nest in the rocks and on beaches. They're very defensive of their nests. If you are walking through a nesting area, you will be bombed by these guys. They will swing in like they're going to hit you in the head. And they can occasionally connect with a person, but normally it's just a threat posture. Probably the best thing to do if that happens is move away, because you don't want to step on a nest, right? And you probably don't want to be bombed by these guys either. They're pretty big birds. But the other interesting thing about that picture is the thing in the foreground is a moray eel. And my wife and I have been, she's a marine biologist. We're both lifelong divers. We spend an awful lot of time on the water, both professionally And since we've been sailing for the last 10 years, this is the only time we've ever seen a moray eel come out of water looking for prey. And here it was trying to get to these chicks. And mom and dad Goal were saying, what the heck's going on here? They're looking at it and yelping at it and, threatening it and trying to drive it away, which they eventually successfully drove it away. And the eel went back into the water. So that's a good transition to fish. There's about 35,000 species of fish in the world. And in the Sea of Cortez, there's about 891 species. Of those 891 species, there are about 90 endemic species, 90 fish species that you can't see anywhere else in the world. So this one it looks like a porcupine fish. It's a balloon fish. All these photos, by the way, are by Lisanne, my wife. This is I think it's a brown-cheeked blenny. So these are small fish. They live in little tubes. You can find them almost everywhere in the Sea of Cortez. You can find blennies living in their little burrows or their little tubes. There's lots of different species. You have to get out either have to have very good eyesight or get out a magnifying glass or take a close-up picture to figure out what species are. And they sit in their burrows and they'll occasionally dart out like this one has done and take a bite out of a piece of plankton and go right back into their burrows. You'll also, by the way, occasionally see these guys camped out on the bottom of your boat. If you haven't cleaned off the bottom of your boat in a while, you might start to pick up some blennies hanging out on your boat. Seahorses, we've seen seahorses only a couple of times in the Sea of Cortez. I'm told they're quite common, but we have seldom seen them. I am not sure, but I think they were probably overfished for the aquarium trade at one time. I don't know that for sure, but it seems like a very likely thing to have happened. The fisheries pressure in the sea of various kinds, and I'll come to that, has been tremendous over the years. Rays, so that's a leopard grouper trying to hog the shot in the foreground, but this is a school or a school, a flock, whatever you want to call them, of cownose rays. And you'll see these guys often swimming by. You'll also see different species of mobular rays, which include manta rays. You'll often see them on the surface. You'll see them in big groups. Lots and lots of rays in the Sea of Cortez. In fact, I've seen more rays in the Sea of Cortez than I've seen anywhere else in the world. We've seen as many as, I don't want to exaggerate, I think I've seen as many as 7 ray species on a single dive before. And we have been on dives frequently where we would see thousands of individual rays. And usually those thousands of rays are Cortez rays, a small stingray. But among those species of ray, I mentioned already the manta ray, the mobular rays, the cownose rays, the Cortez rays, the diamond stingback ray, or the diamondback, sorry, the diamond stingray, and various others. And this is one of my favorites. It's a small ray. This is the bullseye electric ray. So it won't sting you, but it will give you an electric shock. The bullseye electric ray. Lots of invertebrates as well in the sea. This is the common name of this is usually just given as coral crab. This crab is about the size of a United States dime, I would say, something like that. Maybe a big one might be the size of a nickel. And they hide out down in the coral. So lots and lots of small critters that you can see mixed in with the coral. And lots of these guys, these are nudibranchs. Nudibranch it's actually the common name used for these things, but it's from the Latin. It's also a scientific name for the family, and it just means naked gill. So a lot of these appendages that you're seeing sticking out of these things are where it exchanges gas. It gives off carbon dioxide and takes in oxygen just like we do, but through this naked gill. And this is a kind of a mollusk. It's a shellless mollusk. So it's a shellless snail, like a slug. There are 17 species in the Sea of Cortez. To my knowledge, all 17 species are absolutely beautiful, just like this one. They're really fantastic animals to see, and they're quite common, but they're small, so you have to look for them. They're anywhere from say a half an inch long, or probably even less than that, to larger species would be maybe 3 inches long. So they're fairly small, but also fairly common. And sea turtles. So this is a baby sea turtle, freshly hatched. That turtle's probably less than 4 hours out of the egg and less than half an hour in the water. That's an olive ridley sea turtle. So there's 7 species of sea turtle in the world. There's 5 of them are known to occur in the Sea of Cortez. We see 3 of them fairly frequently. the two that we seldom or probably hardly ever see or never see are the loggerhead and the leatherback, but they are out there. The ones that you'll commonly see are the green, which is in the Sea of Cortez, it's called the black. It's actually the same species as the green, so it's sort of a black version of the green sea turtle. And the olive ridley, those are the two most common species. And the third one that you're likely to see is a hawksbill. Well, I was talking to a marine biologist who was working in the lower sea, and he's been working at the same site for decades. And he said he hardly ever sees hawksbill turtles and was surprised that we see hawksbills fairly often. So I found that interesting that a guy working down there never saw them, but we see them often just because we're in a different part of the sea. So why am I showing you the tail end of a turtle? I think this is an olive ridley. Why am I showing you this picture? This is something that you see really too often. I'm not going to say often, but too often. This is a turtle that's in trouble. This turtle is doing what's called corking. It has some air trapped under its carapace. It has some air trapped in its tissues, so it can't submerge. And you'll see these poor turtles trying to submerge, struggling. They might get down a foot or two, and then boop, they come back up. And if they can't get rid of that gas that's trapped in their tissues and trapped under their carapace, if they can't get rid of that, they're going to die. They can't feed on the surface. And also, if a big storm comes along and they're trapped on the surface, they're going to be in trouble. So that's called a corking behavior. You might see it, and you might even think, oh, this is great. We can get a really good view of this turtle because it's staying on the surface. Oh, and look, we can come right up next to it. It's not going anywhere. That turtle is already highly stressed and panicking, trying to escape from you. If it's corking, probably best to leave it alone. If there's a veterinarian nearby, they can be saved. You can pull the gas out from inside their tissues with a syringe. But without a permit, you're not allowed to handle the turtles. And without the knowledge of how to do it, you wouldn't be doing any good anyway. So leave them alone, but corking turtles. Unfortunately, we also see a little bit too much of this kind of thing. This is a dead turtle. It's a dead green. From memory, this was a female and just under reproductive size female green turtle. And I showed this to our friend Martin, who's a Mexican biologist working in the area around Loreto. I showed him this picture, which was taken at around a depth of around 70 feet near Cabo Polmo. No, not near Cabo Polmo, near Popito, near Popito. So we came across this dead turtle. We find lots of turtle remains both on beaches and in the water, but they're usually slaughtered, and this one hadn't been slaughtered. So we took a lot of pictures of it, and I'll come back to the slaughtering in just a moment. We took a lot of pictures of it and took him to Martin, and he said he saw pretty clear evidence that it died in a gill net. And turtles, when they're caught in gill nets, drown. And then when the fishermen pick them up, they have to decide whether they're going to keep the turtle and eat it, which is illegal, or whether they're going to throw it over the side, which is probably what happened to this animal. So I'll take, well, I'll take a minute here just to talk about turtle conservation. So sea turtles have made a tremendous comeback. They're in the last, say, 20 years. They're still nowhere nearly as abundant as they were in the past. And why have they made a comeback? Mainly because most of the Western world, including Mexico, made it illegal to harvest turtles and illegal to harvest turtle eggs. Does that mean nobody does it? Absolutely no, it does not mean that. People are still harvesting turtles in the Sea of Cortez. Poachers are still taking eggs, but it's nowhere near as common as it used to be. And now, in most of the communities around the Sea of Cortez, there are people that are working to protect the nests, to protect the eggs, and try to get more eggs to reach the survival point and get them back in the water. And there's often opportunities to volunteer with those groups, particularly in San Carlos, where many sailors store their boats. There's a very active turtle conservation community there. Easy to get in touch with those guys, easy to volunteer to help with them, or just to make a small donation and adopt a nest, help them out financially, and then you adopt a nest and you get to release the turtles that come out of that nest when they hatch. So what's killing the turtles these days? Well, some poaching, but mainly gill nets, long lines, and shrimp trawlers are probably the three most common things that are killing turtles in the Sea of Cortez today. And for that matter, in most other oceans. So, some people, when I talk about conservation, they say, well, people have always been part of the environment. And that's sort of true. We've been around, Homo sapiens have been around for about 300 million years, or 300,000 years, Homo sapiens. 300,000 years and say 350,000 years in Europe and in Africa and Asia, and about maybe between 10 and 15,000 years in the Americas. Before the Spanish came to this part of the world, the Seri Indian were in communities up and down the coast of the Baja and on the mainland, and some other Indian or other Aboriginal tribes on the mainland coast. And then in the upper left is a photograph, so I'm guessing from probably the 1920s or so. In the lower right, a drawing. The Seri moved around in these canoes that they made out of reeds. So think about reeds like cattails that are just this sort of flimsy plant. You bundle them all together, you tie those bundles together, and then you join 2 or 3 bundles and you have a boat. And anyone who spent time in the Sea of Cortez has enjoyed northers and maybe enjoyed a Chubasco or whatever. It gets pretty wild sometimes in the Sea of Cortez. And back in the day, before any real weather forecasting, the Seri Indian populated all of the, they populated most of the islands of the sea and most of the coastline. And where they didn't populate it was because there would be no reliable water source, so they wouldn't have a permanent population. But oftentimes they still hunted there. And there's a really good resource available. It's put out by one of the museums in Arizona. It's free. You can get it online. It's a JPEG file. It lists every single island in the Sea of Cortez and summarizes the archaeological information that's known from that island. And you can find it just by Googling something like Sea of Cortez Islands Archaeology, or just email me and I can send you a JPEG or something like that. So, oh, by the way, the Seri people are still present in a few communities, mainly the community of Kino on the mainland coast next to Isla Tiburon. And my understanding is that Isla Tiburon is a Seri possession, and really you shouldn't be on shore there without permission from the Seri people. So I talked already about fishing in the context of turtles, of sea turtles, and here's some examples of the kinds of fishing that are going on. So a shrimper in the upper left, a purse seiner on the top, a ponga on the bottom, and the ponga is just a sort of an open launch with an outboard. You know, they haven't really been around that long, but now they're everywhere. Sometimes they fish with long lines, sometimes they use gill nets, sometimes they just use a hook and line. I helped a couple of guys octopus fishing one day out of their ponga, not because I like to octopus fish, but because I wanted to see how they did it. So they were using trap lines to catch octopus. They also have a diving fishery that works out of pongas. I guess at the end of the day about all this with the fishing is that the Sea of Cortez, like most oceans in the world, is dramatically overfished. And I'm sure there's people listening to this saying, oh, Bill, there's lots of fish in the Sea of Cortez. We catch fish all the time. And that is true. People do catch fish there all the time and they're still fishing it. But it's also true that it's dramatically overfished. Every line of evidence that we have says that there used to be a lot more fish in the sea. They used to be much larger. The target species of the fisheries keep changing as more preferred fish are fished out. They switch to other species. If you talk to some of the older fishermen about it, if you speak half decent Spanish, they'll tell you the same story. They're not catching fish that are as big as they used to be. They're having to go further to catch the fish that they do catch, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's I'm not saying this to fault the Mexican fishermen. This is a worldwide problem. It's not just in Mexico. In fact, there was a great review paper about the fisheries in the Sea of Cortez. It was written, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago, that talked about how badly the sea was being hammered by overfishing. But it ended, the paper ended by, and this is a scholarly paper, some academic journal, it ended by saying something like, oh, but that's no different than any other ocean basin around the planet. So it's not unique to the Sea of Cortez, but it is a huge, huge issue. And of course, lots and lots of people are weighing in on what to do about this. And there are no fishing areas posted around the Sea of Cortez that are forming refugia, hopefully for fish to get a toehold and start coming back and recovering throughout the sea. I think this is my next to last slide. So this is a painting, a wall mural that's painted up in Puerto Penasco or Rocky Point, up in the northern corner of the Gulf of California. And there's a great haul out facility up there, a great dry yard called Cabrales. It's a real budget opportunity for do-it-yourselfers. But there's also this painting that's just on a wall around the corner from the shipyard or from the boatyard. And of course, that shows a Day of the Dead mermaid. So Day of the Dead, of course, a big event throughout Mexico. In this case, someone made a Day of the Dead mermaid. And that Day of the Dead mermaid is touching of the nose of Vaquita porpoise. Some people think that there's maybe 10 or 12 Vaquita porpoises left in the world. They base that on recorders. There's a network of recorders spaced out around the northern Sea of Cortez, and they believe they're still hearing some calls from the Vaquita porpoise. I personally am pretty skeptical that 12 animals last very long in the wild, a population that small. And what's killing these guys, mainly gill nets. And gill netting up in that part of the sea is illegal. And why are people still doing it? Because they're going after the highly valued totoaba fish. Why is the totoaba so valuable? The totoaba is so valuable not for its flesh, but because it has a swim bladder, and that swim bladder, when it's dried and smuggled out of the country and sent to China or to other parts of Asia, is worth more by weight than cocaine. So the cartels are involved. Sea Shepherd is involved in trying to prevent it, et cetera, et cetera. And meanwhile, the Vaquita, despite some very, very significant efforts to save it, is well and truly on the road to extinction. Sadly. And this is my last slide. This is a book I was published recently about, well, July 2nd it came out, so about a month ago, I guess. And I'm happy to talk more about that if anyone wants to, but I felt obligated to throw a plug out here for my most recent book. And on the right is our boat. So our boat is Rocinante. You can see us on AIS. There's a couple of Rocinantes often in the Sea of Cortez. We're the old one. We're in a 60-year-old Pearson Countess. I like to say mostly restored because you can never get in front of everything on a boat that old, but she's a great boat. If you see us anchored somewhere, come on by and say hi if you want to go for a nature walk or something like that, or swim. We're almost always up for that. We're not doing it for money, not interested in money, donations, nothing like that. I guess the only thing we'd ask in exchange is if you do that, spend a little time talking with your network of friends and acquaintances, talking with them about nature and about what you see in the Gulf of California, the Sea of Cortez, and on the Baja Peninsula. So with that, I'll say thanks. And I know it's a small group here, but if anyone has any questions or comments or thoughts, I believe I can hear as well as be heard.
Bill, thank you very, very much. This has been an amazing, an eye-opening presentation, certainly from the rocks all the way to the turtles. And we strive to bring more of these type of talks to the people that are on boats. So I thank you for that. We have aggressively collected over the last few years locations of long lines, which we're obviously vehemently against, and we will continue to do so. We have that available. So if you go oceanposse.com/longlines, you'll see the locations which we have been recording over the last 2 years.
Yeah, of course. And I mean, I'm sure you know most of those long lines that you're seeing are perfectly legal, and they move. They're usually picked up. Usually the fishermen will work an area until it's not productive anymore, then they'll move somewhere else.
The long lines for us it's a hazard to navigation. They're badly marked, and obviously it's not that they're illegal, but what results they produce and the species they catch, that's the illegal part of it.
Oftentimes that's true, and I've seen a lot of shark fishing going on that's pretty clearly in breach of Mexican laws. As most people realize, enforcement in Mexico leaves a little bit to be desired, and the people are poor, so the people are going to keep doing these things. One thing I'll say about long lines and also about gill nets, in my opinion, it's impossible to sail in most parts of the world today. You can't sail in a straight line for more than a few hundred miles without running into some kind of fishing gear. And if you think about that, and usually what we do is divert course so we don't run over people's fishing gear, obviously. But when you think about that and you think of a sea turtle swimming, the sea turtle can't see a gill net. It can't see a long line coming. It's just swimming around randomly and it's running into these things. And that's when I said that lots of sea turtles are dying in fishing gear. That's exactly what I mean. It's annoying to sailing yachts. It's deadly to sea turtles.
All right. Anybody else got any questions for Bill before we close this down? Please come now. All right, Bill, thank you again. This is an amazing, it's an amazing topic. Where can we buy this book? Is it on Amazon? Do you sell it directly? Can you put a
No, I
link
definitely
in
don't
here
sell it
somewhere?
directly. I absolutely do not sell it directly. It's on Amazon and any bookstore, really. I mean, it's a major publisher. Just you can get them. Amazon is generally the easiest place, I suppose.
Okay, great. Well,
Should probably be out in paperback and Audible soon. There's always a delay after the hardback release before the paperback is out. I believe it's available electronically. So
and where are you currently, Bill, and where are your cruising plans this fall?
I'm currently in the Netherlands. My wife is Dutch, and we're here visiting her 94-year-old father, and then we're going to do a bike trip until the end of hurricane season when it starts to cool off a little bit. We'll head back to Topolobampo where we've got our boat for the summer, and cruising somewhere in the Gulf, and perhaps a little bit further south this year. We've been in the Gulf the last 3 years. We're starting to get a little bit tired of the January, February weather. It's a
Yeah,
little bit cold for casual swimming. We still swim basically every day, but you're wearing wetsuits to swim by February, I would say. And so we might head a little bit further south this year. But yeah, so hopefully anyone seeing this video, if you see us, please say hi. If you have kids and you want us to talk to your kids about biology, we can do that as well. So yeah, and if there's anyone that's interested in more stuff about biology, I'm happy to do another talk about a particular topic, or my wife, who's also a very well-trained marine biologist and an excellent photographer, she'd probably be happy to do something as well.